Welcome to Financial Math. This is the first of several lessons on bonds. On this lesson, I'm going to focus just on terminology, and then in following lessons, I'll talk more about the mathematics related to bonds. So let's look at the definition of a bond. It's a fixed income instrument that represents a loan made by an investor to a borrower, usually a corporation or government entity. When an entity needs to raise money for a long period of time, for example, a city looking to build a sports stadium, they issue bonds, also known as debentures, which are sold to investors. Bonds are a form of debt. A bond is essentially a contract between the issuer, sometimes known as the lender or the bond issuer, and the investor, sometimes known as the borrower or the bondholder. It specifies the following. There's a face value or denomination of the bond, which is stated on the front of the bond. This is usually, but not always, the amount of money to be paid to the bondholder when the bond matures. Then there's the maturity date. That's almost self-explanatory. It's sometimes known as the redemption date. And that's when the loan will be repaid. So that's the end of the term of the bond. In some cases, it is possible to redeem a bond after the maturity date, but typically no interest is accumulated after the maturity date. So, for example, U.S. Series EE savings bonds can be held beyond maturity, but no interest accrues. There's really no reason to hold them any longer, though some people forget to cash them in, and there's no penalty other than you're not making any interest on your money, and then you can come back later after the maturity date and get the basically the stated face value on the EE savings bond. The rate of interest that the bond issuer pays the bondholder is known as a coupon rate. It is critical to keep in mind that the coupon rate is on the face value of the bond and not on the purchase price. So this is a bit tricky. I'll give you an example. You might have a 10-year Treasury bond, which right now, May 5th, 2026, it has a coupon rate of 4.125%. And let's say a bank buys that, and then you as an individual purchase it from the bank a month later at let's say it was $10,000 originally, and you paid $10,500. So you're still going to get the 4.125% on the 10,000, not on the 10,500. So your yield is effectively going to be less than what the bank would have had kept if they kept the bond and not sold it. Of course, their intention was to resell it to customers. So we'll get into this more when we talk about the mathematics, but there's the coupon rate and then there's the actual yield because of which may be different, which is typically different because of the resale aspect of bonds. There's also something called a zero coupon bond, which does not have a coupon rate and does not pay regular interest to the holder, but is sold at a discount and renders a profit at maturity when the bond is redeemed for its full face value. So the United States Series EE savings bonds are examples of zero coupon bonds. You may buy one for $500. The face value will say $1,000, and so your $500 grows to maybe $1,000 in 10 years, but you're not given any interest along the way. You're just given the double the amount when the EE savings bond matures. The U.S. Treasury bonds, on the other hand, do pay semi-annual interest to the bondholder based on the coupon rate. I repeat a few of the concepts on this slide that I mentioned on the previous slide. Hopefully that'll help things sink in a bit. The price at which the bond issuer originally sells the bonds is known as the issue price. Since bonds can be resold, there could be additional purchase prices, as we saw in the example I mentioned. It is important to note that the coupon rate does not change when a bond is resold. It's still based on the issue price. After issuance, bonds trade in the secondary market where prices fluctuate. The amount of money that will be paid on the date of maturity is known as the redemption value. If the redemption value is the same as the face value, the bond is said to be redeemed at par. The yield of a bond is the rate of return the bond generates. This is not to be confused with the bond's coupon rate, which is based on the face value of the bond. So I gave you an example of that on the previous slide. I have another example here. If a $100 bond with a 6% coupon rate sells for $100, then the current yield is 6% per year. However, because of market fluctuations, it may be possible to purchase this bond for the price of $80. That might be because interest rates have gone up, and so in order to keep pace with the interest rates, whoever owned this bond and wants to sell it is forced to sell it at a lower price. If a $100 face value bond is purchased for $80, the current yield is now 7.5%, since the $6 annual coupon payment, 6% of 100, is now 7.5% of $80, the secondary purchase price. If, on the other hand, someone bought the bond for $120, and that may happen if the interest rates go down, the bond price typically goes up, then the yield would be just 5%. On this slide, I want to talk about the different usages of the term yield. We saw two of them already, and there's a third one, yield to maturity, that I'll also talk about on this slide. So the first two we already saw. Coupon rate. The annual coupon is a percentage of face value, and this doesn't change when the bond is, or if and when it's resold. And then there's the current yield, and that does change. It depends on typically the resale value. And we saw with our $100 bond that was sold for $80, how that changed the yield since you were buying it at a lower amount, so you got a higher yield. And then there's this more complicated expression here, yield to maturity. It's the internal rate of return implied by the bond's price, its coupon schedule, and the redemption payment at maturity, i.e. it's the discount rate Y that makes the present value of all future cash flows equal the price. All right, so that's quite a mouthful, but hopefully the example will make it a little bit clearer. And we're going to get into the details of this later on. So this is the first time you'll see it, but we'll reinforce the idea as we move along. And then just a note here, when I say yield later on in these lessons, I typically mean YTM unless I state otherwise. So let's go back to our example with the $100 bond. It was a 6% coupon rate, so that's this first one here. And it was, let's say it was the example where it was purchased for $80, so in the resale. And what I didn't tell you is that the bond is for 3 years. So you get your $100 back in 3 years. And in the case of this person who repurchased it, they're going to get $100 back based on their only $80 investment. And but they missed the first payment. Let's say the payments are the coupon payments are semi-annual. So there's 5 more coming after that. So in this case, let's look at the yield first, the current yield. The 6%, you need to divide by 80, the price, and that gives you 0.075 or 7.5%. So that's the current yield. Then the yield to maturity is the present value of each of these payments. So this payment, this will be the very first payment that the second owner of the bond gets. He or she missed the first one, but they get the second one. So after 6 months, we have to get the present value of this. So it's 1 plus y to the minus 1 times 3, or we can write it this way here. And this is the present value of the second um, coupon payment, third, fourth, and fifth. This is at the very end. And then this is the present value of the $100 you get at the end. And then we set that equal to 80. That was the purchase price. And then you need to solve for y, which you need a numerical technique to do that, which we're not going to do right here. But I'll tell you that if you solve for y, you get roughly 5%, or that comes to about 10% annualized YTM. Okay, so we'll come back to this. We'll just be aware that there's different rates, and a lot of this comes from the fact that bonds can be resold, and that leads to a different yield from the coupon rate, and then that changes this YTM also. I have a few more definitions on this slide, and then I'll do a summary after. So a callable bond, also known as a redeemable bond, allows the issuer to redeem the bond before it reaches the stated maturity date. On the call date, the bond issuer has the option, not the obligation, to buy back the bond from the bondholder, in other words, redeem it, at a defined call price. The issuer of a callable bond may choose to call their bonds if market interest rates move lower, and then reissue another series of bonds at a lower rate. So, why would you buy that? And if it sounds like the issuer of the bond has all these advantages. Well, in order to get people to buy this type of bond, the callable bonds compensate investors for the possibility of the bond being called by offering a higher interest rate than comparable non-callable bonds. So there's kind of a little bit of a risk here, but then you get a higher return, or potentially you get a higher return, at least for a period of time. If it gets called, then you get some money back, probably your purchase price, and then you have the possibility of buying another bond at that point. Then we have, and I just have a note here that typically when I use the word yield, I'm not talking about any of these complex yields that may be defined for callable bonds. There's something called yield to call or yield to worst to summarize callable bond returns under early redemption scenarios. So normally I'm not going to be talking about those. I don't think I mentioned them at all actually in future lessons. So when I say yield, I'm talking about things that have a fixed maturity date. In other words, not callable bonds. Then we have two other types of bonds. We talked about the savings bonds. Can typically be redeemed before or after maturity, subject to holding period rules and penalties. The investor, the bondholder, will receive the face value of the bond, typically the purchase price plus accrued interest. Okay, so these vary based on the country and the type of savings bond. Then there's a marketable bond. For example, corporate bonds or government bonds cannot be redeemed early by the holder, but may be sold in the secondary market. Some may be callable by the issuer, so these could be a sub-case of callable. If the holder of a marketable bond needs to liquidate a bond before the maturity date, the holder must sell the bond on the open market at a price that depends on current interest rates and other market factors. Okay, so we have these types of bonds that will come up as we get into the details in future lessons. So let's look at a summary of all these terms, and hopefully that'll help you grasp some of these ideas if they're new to you. On this slide I have a summary of the different terms. We have the face value, or par value in sometimes used. That's the amount paid to the bond holder at maturity. That's the basis for the coupon payments. Then there's the coupon rate. That's the interest rate applied to the face value. The coupon payment, the actual amount of the interest paid on some regular basis. the maturity date, when the redemption amount is repaid. It's sometimes the principal, sometimes not. It's when the bond ends. So the example of when it's not the principal is a double E savings bond. The face value might be $500, but what you get paid at redemption is $1,000. And so that's not the principal, it's actually twice the principal. Then you have the redemption value, which we just talked about. It's usually the face value on the bond. So when you buy a $1,000 bond, you normally would pay $500, and you get back the face value. And again, talking about double E U.S. savings bonds. Then there's the issue price, the price when the bond is first sold. Then this market price, that's if the bond is sold. And it could be resold several times. That's the current, whoever's holding the bond at that moment, that's the market price, whatever they paid for it. Then there's the current yield. That's the coupon divided by the market price. Then there's this complicated thing we talked about, the yield to maturity. That's the internal rate of return. It's basically setting the price you paid for the bond equal to the present value of the cash flow, the different coupon payments, and then the whatever additional amount you get at the end of the bond, additional beyond the purchase price. And then you solve for the interest rate that would make those two things equal. Then there's a zero coupon bond. So there's no interest paid along the way. You just get a larger value than what you paid for at the beginning. And the example that I gave were the U.S. double E savings bonds. Then we had these three types of bonds that we just talked about. The callable bonds, where the issuer can redeem them early. The marketable bonds, which can be traded. And then there's the savings bonds. They're non-marketable government bonds, and they have various redemption rules. On this slide, I have a summary of bonds presented in a different way. We have bond at the top, and then we have these different concepts. There's cash flow, and that could either be the coupons, which are paid periodically throughout the course of the bond's life. And then there's the principal or the redemption value. It may not be the initial amount you paid, but the redemption value. So these are the two ways that you get money back when you purchase a bond. Then there's the different pricing. There's the issue price when it's first sold. Then if it's sold the second or third time or whatever, there's the market price. If the market price is more than the issue price, then you've paid a premium. And if the market price is less than the issue price, then it's said to be purchased at a discount. And then we have different features like callable, which we talked about, where the issuer can redeem the bond early, and then marketable, whether you can sell it on the secondary market. So not all bonds have these features. And then we discussed the different meanings of the word yield, or the different types of yields. There was the coupon rate, which remains fixed. That's always a percentage of the face value. And then there's the current yield, which could vary based on the price that's paid in the secondary market. And we saw an example of that. And then there was the yield to maturity, which was this actually it was a true value of the return rate, but it's a little bit hard to compute. You need to take the purchase price on one side of the equation, and on the other side of the equation you need to take the present value of the coupons and the amount that you get paid at the end, and equate the two, and then solve for the interest rate that makes those two equal, and that gives you this YTM on it, and you can convert that into a yearly basis also, as we saw in our example. Okay, so that's the last slide in this lesson. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up, And then I have at least one more, probably more than one lesson on bonds. I haven't prepared them yet. That's why I don't know how many, but I'll get more into the detail of the mathematics in those lessons.